Joining me now to talk about the odds, LaTosha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund, and Tia Mitchell, Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It is good to see you both. Tia, Warnock targeting voters outside the Atlanta suburbs today. What does that tell you about Warnock's closing strategy?
Yes, Warnock's closing strategy has been to have as many events as possible, speaking to as many different constituency groups as possible. So today we see him campaigning with college students, but he's also, over the past few days has campaigned with Black voters. Last night he was with AAPI voters. He's also, been looking at younger voters. He's really trying to broaden and build his coalition. Even with the Dave Matthews band last week, and suburban voters, even white voters. So that's what we've seen from the Warnock campaign.
And now contrast that for me with what you're seeing from Walker.
So it was interesting. Walker was very limited in his campaigning this weekend. He held no public events on Saturday, although he did go to a tailgate party outside of the SEC championship. And then today he only had one public event, which was in Loganville, in kind of a more exurban metro Atlanta, almost rural part of Georgia. And so Herschel Walker, when he does campaign publicly, tends to stick with his base. He tends to stick in solid Republican strongholds and draw audiences that are kind of, friendly to that MAGA Republican message that he has.
LaTosha, tell me if you think I'm wrong here. I think a lot of this comes down to who actually turns out between now and Election Day. We have new NBC News reporting that dives into the increase of new voters who are casting ballots. Quote, Democrats say some of their Georgia base sat out the November election because they assumed Warnock would easily win. Instead, he finished less than 1 point ahead and was forced into a runoff. As a result, some previous non-voters are turning out now. Your sense, your work, how are organizers working to bring new voters into the process in these final days?
I think that there's some truth to that. I think there are young voters that we're seeing coming out in record numbers. They came out in the midterms, but we're also seeing an increase of voters. I've actually ran into voters who said, I didn't vote last time, but guarantee you I'm going to vote this time. And so I do think that there's a renewed sense of this is a close election and how critical it is and how critical we need to that for the state of Georgia, we need to have someone in that seat that really can serve the people of Georgia. And so I am seeing young people. I think one of the things that is really significant around how Warnock is running his campaign is I think that he's basing his campaign on the future of Georgia, that literally it is going to take a broad-based coalition to actually be able to win the Democratic ticket, from AAPI voters to Latino voters to African-American voters to progressive white voters to the LGBTQ community. And what we've been seeing is a very intentional effort from the Warnock campaign to make sure that you're reaching out to these communities, these various communities, and actually being able to speak have a message specifically related to those communities, tailored to them, and also be able to pull that coalition together so that they not only come out in early voting, but that we also see a flood of voters for on Tuesday.
LaTosha, let's talk about that turnout, because you've seen the same images, the same video that I've seen. You've probably seen it in person, given that you are on the ground in Georgia. Lines wrapped around the block. Sometimes voters having to wait in line for 2 hours to vote. So on one hand, good that people are engaged in their democracy. On the flip, it should not be this hard. It should not take this long for people to vote. When you see that footage, what does it tell you?
I have the same emotion. One, I'm really happy to see that people are coming out. But secondly, this should not be the case, that people are waiting in line for 2, 3, 4 hours. I think what people also should recognize is that SB 202 was damaging. While we are seeing record numbers, what we have to recognize is we're in a truncated election period. That last time in the runoff election, it was 8 weeks. We had 8 weeks around voting, being able to vote. Now there's been truncated to 4 weeks. And so you have a shorter period of time. So you have higher numbers, but it also lessens the opportunity to actually have a broader base of folks to actually participate in the election. I think that was part of why we said was voter suppression. And so we are seeing people, I think it's an indicator that not only after this election day, that certainly there's a particular kind of victory that we're going to see in Georgia, but we need a victory in this country of the restoration of voting rights. There's no doubt about it. I think what we're seeing in those long lines of what's happening in Georgia should be an indicator that voter suppression as a tactic and a strategy did have an impact on voters.
Yeah, Tia, we're seeing Republican senators campaign for Walker in these final days. It seems like he's always side by side with a national GOP figure. How would Walker picking up this Senate seat impact the Biden agenda over the next 2 years?
It would have a huge impact because it would keep the Senate at a 50-50 split. So yes, Vice President Harris can break a tie if a vote gets to that point. But what we're seeing is that, even in committees, they have to split it 50-50. So Republicans can stall legislation, stall appointments just by refusing to show up in committee and robbing it of the quorum needed to push legislation forward. So by keeping the Senate at 50-50, keeping those committees split, that limits Democrats' power. That really means that their majority is just in tiebreaker only in the case of a tiebreaker. If Warnock stays in the Senate and they get that 51, they get a majority on all the committees. That means they can push appointments through faster. They can launch investigations even over the objection of Republicans. It would very much empower the Senate in a way they aren't right now, and it could prove to be a counterbalance as Republicans prepare to take control of the House.
LaTosha, I don't need to tell you that during the midterm race, Walker trailed Brian Kemp by about 200,000 votes, right? So I imagine that there is a universe of voters that Democrats are focused on there, working to target those Georgians who voted for other Republicans, couldn't bring themselves to cast a ballot for Walker. How are Democrats reaching those voters?
I think that's part of this multi-messaging, having multi-layer messaging. And we're seeing this from the Warnock campaign. He's been very intentional. If you see some of his campaign ads, he's been very intentional to reach out to independent voters, that voters that don't necessarily align themselves with the Republican Party or the Democratic Party very strongly, but also have either a particular issue, an area, or they want a particular kind of leadership in place. And so he's had many commercials that is very clear that he's been working to attract them. And I think the Democratic Party is actually going to be able to attract independent voters to the ticket in this election cycle.
I got to ask you one more quick question, LaTosha, which is how important is this race for Democrats in Georgia to prove that they should continue to get national attention, national funding from political parties? I mean, it would seem to me this is a critical moment for the party infrastructure.
Oh, this is a critical moment, not only, I think, for Georgia Democratic structure, but also nationally. I think it sends a message that what we saw in Georgia is right after that election, we saw SB 202, which was the voter suppression blueprint. That one, I think it's really important for the Democrats and Democratic voters to send a message loud and clear that voter suppression will not be tolerated, that as we're moving forward as a state, that we're going to set a tone, that there's a broad-based coalition in the state that was a fluke, but is the future of Georgia, and that if political parties want to have power, they're going to have to literally be able to have a broader message to actually meet the needs of a broader group of voters than just one set small group of voters who've decided to be against a party that decided to be against everything like the Republicans.
Can I just say, LaTosha, I am so impressed that during your busiest season, you have somehow found time to Christmatize your home. I mean, that is the most amazing tribute. I don't know where you find the time, how you have the energy. LaTosha, Tia, thank you for coming and sharing your reporting. I'm going to see a lot of you both over the next 2 days. Now, jury